If somebody's starting, I would say get a mentor right from the bat. Get somebody who has helped other people build a business from the ground up. Don't just try it yourself, because it'll take you 4 years where it could have taken you a couple months to figure out exactly what you're doing, who you're doing it for, what a mission and the vision is and how they differ, and how having that strategy set up correctly from the start will help you exponentially in a year.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, a serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Roberto Dacosta. And Roberto went to high school in Long Island, was into arts, hated the school system, loved arts, but there wasn't money in arts. So went to college and got a degree. And then in college also got an internship that later turned into a job in web development. Did that for about 1.5 years, and then later quit the job and went to a senior developer at another position. Did that for another 1.5 years, and then decided he wanted to start his own firm. Learned a lot of great skills and foundational things he could do, got better at branding and marketing side, and also needed to learn the finance and networking side a bit more. So figured that out for a while. And then 2020 with COVID hit and things went downhill and had to pivot and adjust a bit and took it in a bit of different direction, which is where he's at now. And we'll get into that a little bit more with the journey. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Roberto.
Thanks for having me, Dev.
My pleasure. So I gave the kind of a much more condensed version of a much longer journey. So with that, let's take it back in time a bit and tell us a little bit how your journey got started in Long Island in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I was just a silly kid in high school, and I just really liked art. I was always told, I could color within the lines really well, and I think I just had a knack for drawing and painting, and that was a thing I did as a hobby, never too seriously. And then after that, looking at my senior year in high school, I took in graphic design as a course. And I fell in love with that, and also graphic design was a serious market at the time. So and painting wasn't. So, I'd rather do something that I can make money off of. So that's where the game started, really.
And now you're saying, okay, love art. And I think it's still hard. I think that's been the perpetual artist, the plague of artistry in general is typically hard to be, unless you're just, the 1 in a million that catches, following and has a lot of people. But for most artists, you always have the starving artist. And so it seems like that's a natural transition to say, okay, now I can get into web design and web development and kind of graphic design. And that one does have the people are willing to pay for it, and it has kind of that the job availability there. So you go into college, and I think you got a degree in graphic design and web development. Is that right?
It was graphic design. I picked up web development, small skills on the side, just because I found it interesting. And funny enough, somebody I worked with at a restaurant told me somebody needed a graphic design done. I did that graphic design for him, and he asked me if I could do a website. And so I started working with him, a small budget website. It was a basketball tournament team website. And he knew somebody who saw it and wanted my number. That person, Carlos, called me. I'll never forget it. And he said, "When can you start?" And this was like a Friday. I said, "Monday." So I dropped everything, and I took an internship that turned into a junior developer job at a small marketing firm. And the rest is history. I just, graphic design, you'll need it for everything you do. Like everybody needs to know a little bit of graphic design. So that's still a thing that I like to do. But web development really picked up, and then all the marketing skills came from working in a marketing firm for 3 years, 2 different marketing firms. So my junior job led to my senior job at a different firm, and then I left that and I started doing my own. So I started my own little.
Before you dive into that too much, because I think that's
Yeah.
interesting. So, I definitely get, hey, we went into graphic design. One, said, hey, somebody wants to hire me to do a website. Why not? They're paying and it will be a good opportunity. You can learn some new skills. And then found out that, people started to like your work. And then you said, okay, now make it make your career of it, so to speak. And so worked for some other people for a period of time and moved up to senior developer. All that makes sense. Now, what made you decide, or what was kind of the trigger point to say, I want to jump out and do something on my own, as opposed to continue to, move along the ladder, so to speak, or work as a senior developer for someone else? What was kind of that trigger or that cause to make that leap?
Year-round seasonal depression. It was working for somebody just didn't fit me. It's not that I have an authority issue. It's just that I knew that I
Not that you
was,
have an authority issue, you just hate authority. No, just kidding.
I just hate authority. No, it was that I was providing a lot more value than I was getting back. And I knew that if I just focused on myself a little bit on my off time, I would be able to do it by myself. So the idea was, a year before I quit, was, yeah, I could do this by myself. So I started picking up clients after hours, and I built a small little clientele. And by the time I left, it was January 7th. Um, I I had enough to keep me going. And before I looked for another job, I said, let me see 6 months down the road if I could do this. And then 6 months came, and I thought, let me see 6 more months. And I kept pushing it, and I pushed it back. And then, after a year and a half of pushing it back, I said, I'm not even going to look. I'm not even going to bother, because this was just too much fun. Learning by myself, doing it on my own, picking up the skills that I needed to, have a sustaining income.
No, and I think that, that's a lot of times how it kind of starts out. Well, I'll try this out. It's probably going to fail, and I'll keep trying. And then it keeps paying the bills and gets a bit more success, or keeps, working towards it. And before you know it, the thing that was started first as a side hustle, a little bit extra money, that turned into, I'll try it out, turned into an actual career. And I think that that's always a fun way when things develop and continue to move forward. So you did that, I think, for quite a bit of period of time. And then I think we mentioned, or when we talked a little bit before, one of the things that you found that you also needed to learn was a bit more on the finance and the networking side. So how did that kind of fit into your journey? In other words, I think that, branding and marketing side, and you got better at that, and you already kind of had that as educational background, but it's just saying, okay, building, growing, and getting better. How did you go about expanding your skills into finance and networking?
Well, I think underneath it, I always understood that networking was a key component on how to keep my income flow up. Because clients in web or design, they don't need you full time. They need you for that service. And the only way that I was really growing was through word of mouth. That was like the solopreneur, that's their bread and butter, is word of mouth. So without knowing it, I was doing a lot of networking. But it was, 4 years into running this thing by myself, I found myself on a plateau that was harder to break from than I thought it would be. So for me to hit that next level, I needed to do something radically different. And inside somewhere, I knew that networking was going to be the thing. Like I just felt it, because without knowing it, I knew it. So I started going to networking events, and it wasn't long until from when I started to the point where I found out that was the key. How I got more clients, how I got a real community of business owners that would call on me and rely on me solely, was all built from a strong network group, several of them. So yeah, I learned all the skills that I needed to have to thrive in the network community, by just being, a good friend to people in those networks. And that's what the true skill of networking is. It's not how many networks can I hit. It was learning how to become a good person in that community. And that leads to trust, and trust leads to clientele. It was small skill.
No, but I think it's one of those that it's a small skill. Everybody knows what they should do, and yet it can certainly be impactful and have a good, or have a, set your business on a much better and different direction as you continue to get that word of mouth and make those connections. And so sounds like, you were learning those skills, putting time and effort into them, and things are continuing to grow, and you're building out your network and building a team. And then about that time, 2020 hit with COVID, and things kind of took a different turn from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody can say they experienced the same thing. It went from busy to not busy real quick. And it took me from March, when COVID became a thing, until October for me to pivot my entire business, and how myself as a solopreneur. In that time, it was just trying. I just kept trying and trying, and I knew it was going to come back, but I didn't know when. And some people could still say it's still kind of hard to get back in the ball, on the ball, and continue on where they left off in March 2020, right? So that was a hard transition, but it wasn't hard for me to figure out my next move, which was doing networking as a business. So I found the thing that I loved, which was networking, and I made it into a business of mine.
They say, okay, now, I think it took everybody different periods of time. And, it was kind of one where, and it still feels like we're 2 years in and people still don't know what's going on. But, you're saying that, now that you have that realization, saying, okay, at some point I've got to figure it out. I've got to make the pivots. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be a couple of weeks and we're going to be back to life as normal. And so you say, okay, making that transition and that switch a bit, you say, okay, networking is the key. So how did you start? How did you pivot the business in that direction?
Honestly, it was luck. I bought a VR headset to play video games in, but I needed to make it a business expense because money was low, so I needed to make every dollar count to something. And the headset really was supposed to be something for fun, but I needed to make it a tool. And in my search for a good tool to use VR for my design and web development services, I found out that there was a bunch of people, regular people like you and I, in virtual reality, just hanging out, going to events. And these events were meditation events, DJ clubs, things that I didn't realize existed before I jumped into VR. And I remember vividly the first day I jumped in, I went to a karaoke night. And then I jumped into a Cards Against Humanity room, and people were just playing Cards Against Humanity and hanging out and listening to music. And I asked one of the guys there, is there any business events happening here? And he said, no. And then I looked deeper and I saw that there was a huge vacuum of business talks, or the topic of business in social virtual was empty. And that got me really excited. So my transition happened that day. I saw a huge vacuum in how people connected in VR when it came to the topic of business.
No, I think that, sometimes it's that, happy happenstance or happy coincidence that you do something starts out as personal enjoyment, and, similar almost a little bit to the idea that, hey, you had someone that said, can you build a website for me? This one happened to be a little bit coincidental in the sense that, hey, this is something that would be fun and interesting, and why don't we make it a business expense and make it into a business opportunity, and that, pivots things in a different direction. So that kind of takes us a bit to where you're at today. So where's the business at today? Is it launched? Is it coming soon? Is it already have millions of dollars of money raining from the sky? Or kind of where along that journey is the business that you've pivoted and looked at kind of more of that networking and virtual reality aspect?
No, it's very much still in developmental phase. It's not so much in like we have a community, which is the part of the product. What I've done since not this past October, but last October, was create a strong community of business owners in VR. And I started to market myself as VR networking. And then the whole brand took off, and I went from having a room filled with 12 business owners who wanted to continue networking from home, but not over Zoom, the way that we got used to over the pandemic, which was, it doesn't give you the same sense of being with somebody and building that community with that person. That trust isn't really there on 2D where it is in VR. It's just a different sense. You have to experience it to understand, right? But from developing this small little community of 12 people per event once a week, an idea continued to grow from networking to running speaking events. So we brought in, some people who were professional speakers, people that were featured on TED, and we threw that in virtual reality, and we had an audience. And then the idea of what about expos and trade shows? So we built out a trade show space, and we rent out booths for the year, so that we'll run 12 trade shows once per month and have businesses market themselves in these trade shows. We just relaunched that whole system with a new trade show space. So all these different products are all building out one larger community. And the size for comparison is at the beginning of this, we had, on average, 5-12 people come to networking events. Last Monday, we had 200 people show up to a networking event. Yesterday, we had 170 people show up to a networking event. And this is not even the beginning of it. I haven't even laid a solid foundation yet. My hope is to build a community that on any given day, you'll have a networking event with 10,000 people showing up. Have a real solid ability for you to market your business in virtual reality with a community.
No, and I think it's an interesting application to, a bit of a time old thing. In other words, networking has been around for a while, but looking and saying, how can we adapt that and how can we adjust it? And then where's the opportunity? So it sounds like definitely a great avenue and a great path to go down. So now as we've kind of brought ourselves to a bit to the present day of where your journey is taking you so far, great time to transition to a couple of questions I always ask towards the end of the podcast about your journey. So with that, the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
Worst business decision is taking on debt too early. That was a big mistake. Not that it was too much, but it was enough to, slow me down for the long run. And I'm still dealing with the debt that I took on the first 2 years to make that work. So definitely having a solid stream of income and not having any gaps in that while you're building up a business was important, something I overlooked.
No, and I think that, it's one of those where it's hard because sometimes you're saying, if I don't have the money, then I'm never going to be able to start the business. And yet on the other hand, you take on the debt and you take on the money, on that commitment. And then if the business slows down or it doesn't go in the direction, or you have to pivot or adjust, sometimes it can be those handcuffs that make it difficult to be able to navigate the business or otherwise make it successful, because that you may not be able to do or pursue the things that you want, or it can otherwise be that handcuff. So it makes sense on kind of how the mistake occurred, but also, the motivation for not doing or learning from it. So
100%. Yeah.
Second question I always ask is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
If somebody's starting, I would say get a mentor right from the bat. Get somebody who has helped other people build a business from the ground up. Don't just try it yourself, because it'll take you 4 years where it could have taken you a couple months to figure out exactly what you're doing, who you're doing it for, what a mission and the vision is and how they differ, and how having that strategy set up correctly from the start will help you exponentially in a year.
No, and I think that mentorship can make, or as you said, have a big impact. In other words, you can get direction, and sometimes a mentor just tells you the things that, hey, you may not want to do that, you may want to slow down, here are the mistakes I've learned. And sometimes you say, appreciate the input, I'm going to do it anyway. Another time it can certainly give you some lessons learned and avoiding mistakes. And so I think along the way, it's certainly worthwhile to have that mentorship and someone that can be a sounding board, can provide guidance and feedback, and sometimes put you in a different or better direction. So I'd say that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up the podcast, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, whether it's in the VR networking, or they want you to build an awesome website if you're still doing that. If they want to be an employee at some point, if they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
I'm always taking friends, and I'm always taking more people who want to network. They could go to vrnetworking.com. You could always reach me out at Roberto at ConinVR, which is the business name, CONINVR.com. And hopefully I'll get to see you in virtual reality.
Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out. I think it's a fun place, if nothing else, to catch up in the VR world, and worthwhile to connect up and pursue things further. So thank you again for coming on the podcast, Roberto. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be guests on the podcast and share your journey, feel free to go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. Also, as a listener, make sure to click subscribe, share, leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all of these awesome episodes and all the journeys that people take. And last but not least, you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else to your business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Roberto, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin.